23b at 2 dots. At 23b.
23?
Yep.
Oh.
At 2 dots, and we're on. No, are we? What am I saying? No, I'm sorry. You're right. Oh, we are. You're right. We are.
24b. Start at 24.
Yes, 24. We just started 24. Right. My mistake. Sorry.
Where on the page?
1 second. Okay, we're on the third line. The emo.
Third line from the top.
Yep. We're on the middle of the line.
It says the emo. Okay, I
Yep.
see it.
Okay. No, so we're discussing the Evet Kanani leaving his slavery by Rosh Yevarim, by losing a limb. We'll discuss in detail which limbs count and what are the limbs. Okay. And so the Gemara says that the two that the Torah specifically mentions is Shena, tooth, and ayin, an eye. So the Gemara wants to know ve'emak yaka klal. When you talk about, when the Torah speaks about Evet Kanani leaving, it says kiyaka, you'll hit him. Kiyaka is a very broad statement. It's a klal, it's generalization. Shein v'ayin, an eye and a tooth, is specific, right? It's very specific. Prat. So what's the rule? If you have a klal and then a klal uprat, you have a generalization, then it's very specific category. Ein b'chlal ala mashav prat. We say that the prat, the specific, eliminates the general category, which would mean that it's just a tooth and an eye and nothing else.
A tooth, right?
Ein b'chlal mashav prat. Shein v'ayin in, an eye and a tooth, yes. Midiach min aloi, nothing else. So Gemara says, Lachavshi ishalchenu. They'll send him free afterwards. The cause of a kollel, that's again a broad generalization. And you have, therefore, it's a klal uprat klal. A general rule is specific, followed by a general rule. Iatadan elak en haprat. The rule is it's similar to the prat, similar to the specific. Mahaprat mefurish mumsha begolev ein chayzrim. It's a wound everyone can see, and it does not grow back. Any other wound that's exposed and does not grow back is included in the limbs that will cause a Evet Kanani to go free. If that's the case, there's another fact there's another common denominator as well, which is that when you lose an eye, you're a less effective laborer. And if you lose a tooth, you can't chew as well. So there is actually damage to the work he's doing. Alomatanya, but we actually see that that's not necessary. Tolash bezikna v'dildul boy etzem. He was pulling the guy's beard, and apparently he messed around with one of the bones in his cheek or something. Say, how do they translate it?
The bone in the jaw.
The bone in the jaw.
Very hard.
Yeah.
That withers and falls off and does not regenerate.
Right. So it's permanent damage, but apparently it doesn't impact your ability to eat. And I am not an orthopedic, so I don't know. I didn't even know the jaw had more than one bone. Okay. So the question is why? Why is that? Why is that included? Because it's permanent, and it's exposed, even though it doesn't sort of impact his ability to do work. So the Gemara says, "Lachavshi shalchenu ribuyahu." Lachavshi shalchenu is actually an inclusion. It's an inclusion statement. So what we have really here is a klal prat with an inclusive statement. Okay, Rashi points out the other possibility here is that actually this we use riboy miyat and riba. Riboy miyat riboy. According to the riboy miyat riboy, it's the same system as klal prat klal. Same concept. You have an inclusive statement and a limiting statement, but in the concept of riboy and a miyat, unlike klal prat, if we have a klal, a general rule followed by a prat, a specific rule under the system of klal prat, we say ein b'chlal al mashav prat. The general rule is limited by exactly what's in the specific rule. Whereas by miyat and riba, we treat a limitation according to the miyat and riba system. It's the same. It applies to the same sets of psukim. verses. But if you have a expansive statement followed by a limiting statement, that actually teaches us klal prat, klal. In other words, whatever under the system of klal prat or klal, so what we do is the first thing we say is klal prat 0. Klal prat or klal, it's the common denominator. Typically the most important common denominator. So we put in as many as we can. So in this case, what were the common denominators? What's common between tooth and an nail? It's exposed and it's permanent. The Gemara is asking, well, hold on, there's another common denominator. It makes you unable to do work, at least at the same level as previously. Now that's another klal process. Under the riboy and miyut system, a riboy and a miyut, an expansive plus a limited statement, we actually say that there is something included in that statement. We don't say aim b'chlal mashav b'prat, aim b'miyut mashav, aim b'riboy mashav b'miyut. We actually say that no, there are things that are included. We take what we would normally include under klal prat or klal, we include under riboy and miyut, and therefore under miyut and riboy we include even more. Did I get you on that, or that's fine? Okay, the exact mechanics of so riboy, miyut, and riboy is much more inclusive category than klal prat or klal. Basically, it's one step more inclusive. So klal prat is 0. Klal prat or klal is +1. In riboy and miyut is +1. Riboy, miyut, riba is +2. Virtually nothing is included. Virtually nothing is excluded in that circumstance. So riboy and miyut and klal prat is 0. Aim b'chlal ala mashav prat. There's nothing in the general statement unless it's written specifically. So it's not inclusive at all. Whereas klal prat or klal, it includes 1. Riboy, miyut, and riba, if you have a riboy and a miyut, which by the way is the same thing as a klal prat. A klal is a riboy, and a prat is a miyut. It's just a different system that they subscribe to. It's a question on how to use this hermeneutic principle. So riboy miyut is a +1 already. Riboy miyut riba is +2. So the Gemara is saying that if we use riboy miyut riba, we have +2, and therefore not only do we include things that cause you permanent damage in your ability to do work, but also things that include damage that don't impede your ability to do work. As the Gemara says,
Rabbi, this may be the wrong place to ask a question, but I'm just curious. What if the owner injures the slave in a way that does not interfere with their ability to do work, but does set in motion a gradual cumulative deterioration? And in essence, makes the system more vulnerable to future disease, even if it's not manifesting itself now.
Yeah, the answer is he probably does not go out free. We'll learn more in a few minutes. Okay. Okay, so Mar says let's say he hit him on his hand, and I'm not exactly sure what happened here in medical terms, but his hand shrunk or it dried up. But it will get better. That he should also go out free. But why did we learn a slave does not go back, does not go to freedom if it will get fixed. So Gemara says, because otherwise, why did the Torah write Shein V'ayin? In other words, the most important, what we learned from Shein and Ayin is that there is some sort of a minimum requirement for the type of wound, and that is its permanence and the fact that it's visible. The rabbis taught, everything a slave goes out for freedom. He requires a document of emancipation. Reb Meir says you do not need. Rabbi Lozer says tzarach, you do need. Reb Tarfon says ain't tzarach, you don't need. Rabbi Kiva tzarach, Rabbi Kiva says you do need. And those that were trying to solve the mystery in front of the rabbis, they said that they like the opinion of Reb Tarfon that you do not need emancipation, b'shein v'ayin, with a tooth and an eye. Why? Because shein v'ayin are written in the Torah. Everybody knows that if you knock out the tooth of a slave, he goes out free. So if you see a slave on the street and he's missing his tooth, then presumably he went free. Presumably he's a free man. Well, not quite, right? If you see him acting like a free man and you notice he's missing a tooth, you can safely presume that that's probably why he's free.
What if he knocked his own tooth?
No, it doesn't go out. It doesn't go out. What happens if his master was a dentist? We'll get to it.
Oh, my.
Shatera zichsalei, because everybody knows that this is specifically included in the Torah. Rabbi Kiva says you require an emancipation. The shari varum and other organs, because it's a penalty of the rabbis. Simar says knasu hakroi kiddushin. They're telling you that it's included in the psukim, in the verse. It's biblical. Simar says because it's a drasha, it's not clear in the psukim. Therefore, it's appropriate to require a paper. My time of Reb Shimon. What's the reason of Reb Shimon? Reb Shimon requires an emancipation. Yalav shiluach me'isha ma'ish b'shtar evenami b'shtar. Just like a woman is sent with a document, a slave is also sent with a document. For a mayor who disagrees, ikas of chavshi lebesayv hidek amrit. If the Torah would say that you knock at his tooth, he goes out free, then I would say that yeah, you're right. It's like a woman; he requires an emancipation. The Torah says, send him free, tachas shinai, in place of his tooth. Well, as soon as you knock at his tooth, he's already free. In other words, the Torah is specifically telling you that you do not compare it to a woman, and he does not require a document. Okay, what's the degree of the wound? Tanar bottom. He banged him on his eye, he blinded him. On his ear, he made him deaf. So he might still actually have an ear and an eye, but he can't see anymore. What's the story? The slave goes free. Keneged einai, so it was right next to his eye. Ve'ena raya, and he can't see. Keneged oznai, right next to his ear. Ve'ena sheman, he can't hear. Ein eved yaitz behem lecheres, the slave does not leave free. Okay, 1 second. Okay, it appears the reason for this is basically what you did was you slammed a baseball bat into a wall or some other very loud sound, and that sort of scared him and made him unable to see or unable to hear.
Like a spiritual blindness.
I'm sorry.
No overt physical cause.
Right. I don't understand exactly how this works, but the idea here is that because by a human being, he scares himself. And therefore, he doesn't go out free because it's as if he blinded himself. Rav Shaman Ravashi. Rav Shaman says Ravashi, remember the Kollel klumu. You mean to say that a scary noise is not considered damage? Vatani Roman Bar Cheskel taught Tarnagal, you had a chicken. It stuck its head up into a flower vase that was glass. It chirped so loudly, it shattered it. I don't know if this is a thing. I don't know. Although glass was much thinner and much less strong than it was today. There's no question about that.
Like the singer.
What?
You see some of these things with the glass and the singer in a commercial or something.
Yeah. Mishalom Bezek Shalom, you pay full damages. Okay, why do you pay full damages? So without getting too much into this, there's a concept called tzroirus. We'll learn about it. We're going to start by Kama soon. We'll learn about Chatzin Ezek tzroirus. What's the classical instance of tzroirus? The classical example of tzroirus is where you have an animal walking down the street. It's a dirt road, and he kicks a bunch of rocks, and those rocks go ahead and knock down a bunch of glass vases and shatter them. According to Sumchus, that's one opinion, you pay full damages. The voice here is considered tzroirus. So the sound of the chirping of the chicken is the pebble that smashes the jar, and therefore you pay full damages. Rav Yosef Amri Bei Rav. Rav Yosef says in the name the student body of Rav would say sus son of a chamor shanar. You had a horse that blew its nose, or a donkey that yawned, and they were close to vessels when they did that. But Shavru Kalim, they broke vessels. B'seich habayis, inside the house. Mishalom and Chatzin Ezek, they pay half damages, and the reason for that is because they're of the opinion, which is the mainstream opinion, that tzroirus pays half damages. Tzroris is the kicking of the rocks that goes ahead and damages. So in this case, the sneezing,
Unintentional.
it's not the point here is not intentional. It's sort of halachah l'maisha b'sina. I don't want to go. We'll get to it.
Oh, all right.
It's about a little less than 2 months. So yeah, just about a little more than 2 months, about 2.5 months. Yeah. Okay. So basically, so the concept of service is that you sort of sent an agent. The animal sent an agent to do the damage. The agent, in the sense, was the rock, and in this case, the snorting of the horse, the ear of the snort was the rock the snort sent to go ahead and shatter the vessels. Okay. We'll discuss this in Bava Kamel. Okay. The point here is that we see that we consider this real damages. If you blow something intentionally down, then you're chayav. You're liable to pay for damages. The scenario over here is because since the guy whacked something into the wall and made such a loud noise, he made him deaf. He sort of scared himself. When he scared himself in other words, he allowed himself to be scared, and that got him into either blindness or deafness. If somebody scares his friend, then he's potter from under court law, but under the law of heaven will demand retribution. Kate said, "What's an example?" So he snuck up on the guy with a massive shofar, and before the guy could blink, he blew the shofar so loud, not that the loudness made him deaf, but the shock. He was so scared from the sound of the shofar that the guy became deaf. Potter. What?
He was a good actor.
Yeah. Now, what happens if he grabbed the guy by his ear, he locked him and he clamped his ear into a vice grip, and then he blew the shofar right into his ear? So then the guy couldn't have run away. There's nothing he could do. He had no way to control himself. In that case, he was scared because you scared him. So then you would be liable for damages. Okay. Here is the problem. The guy didn't blind him. He made him technically blind. We don't use the word legally, so it's less than legally blind. He needs a very high prescription or something. Okay, or al-shina v'nidda. He sort of dislocated the tooth, but it's still connected. If they're usable, you can't leave the slavery. But he made them unusable. So maybe legally blind could allow you to go free. Tanya idach, the Bryce says, depending on obviously how unusable legally blind is. From what I understand, it's quite unusable. You can't drive a car. You'll never get a license. Nobody will ever give you a license, etc. If that's the case, then not being able to drive a car probably is considered unable to do work. Apparently you can.
But the question is, can you do something else?
Yeah, but I think that's enough type of work. And that's enough type of work that probably makes you eligible to leave. You don't have to be completely blind. It's just to be damaged, you can't do work. The fact you can't drive a car is sort of a pretty basic elementary work that society today does, and probably enough for reason. Tanya Ida.
But if they're totally blind, they can always be in Congress. They can still work.
You could even be dead. You could even be dead and be in Congress.
There you
go. If a person's eye, what happens? So here, he already had a very high prescription, and then with some he blinded him. He can't see at all. Shina neduda, the tooth was shaky. He knocked it over. If it was usable previously, so let's say the guy had his driving license, and you took away his driving license, even though it was sort of a borderline question. Then he goes out free. Then lav, but if it was unusable, he was legally blind, and you made him actually blind. So then, the slave does not leave, does not go out, does not acquire his freedom. But sricha, it's necessary to write both brises. Because if it would have just said the first brisa, where he took something usable and made it less usable, because originally he had good sight, now he has weak sight. That's why he leaves. But in the case where he starts off with a weakened eyesight, and now he weakened it even more, maybe in that case he would not be emancipated, even if the difference in weakness was actually the difference in the driver's license. In other words, even though he had a weak eyesight, but he was still eligible to drive. You weakened it more, Still could see, but he's ineligible to drive. Maybe that's not called, that would not make him eligible to acquire his emancipation. And therefore it's necessary to have the second brayso. If it would have just had the second brayso, mishum desami legamri. The reason why, you made it completely unusable. So you had somebody who couldn't see. I'm sorry, somebody who was legally blind. He could see, but it wasn't usable. And then you went in and blinded him completely. Then he does not leave. He's not emancipated.
But slaves that are injured and not emancipated, what do they do?
Oh, they gotta live the way it is,
It's really tough,
Yeah. Okay, so as follows. So in other words, when you had somebody who was let's say legally blind, you turned them technically blind, completely blind. What do we say? You are not emancipated because you were legally blind beforehand. So in other words, when do we say that you're not emancipated? 1 second. One second, hold on. Okay. So in other words, in the second scenario, the guy had poor vision and you blinded him, because his poor vision, he was eligible to do work. Therefore, he leaves. Therefore, he exits the slavery because you blinded him completely. But in the first scenario, where he had perfect vision and you made it very, very difficult for him to see, maybe legally blind, maybe you didn't ultimately speak and blind him, and therefore he should not go free. That's why it's necessary to have the second brayso that tells you that no, if his vision is not useful anymore, the definition here is sort of useful in both directions. If he had useful vision and you made it worse or blinded him completely or made his vision, if you moved his vision from perfect to still useful, that's fine. He's not emancipated. It's when you cross the line of useful that he goes out free. Whether that means you blinded him completely or whether it means that you made him legally blind. Tana Rabbanon, the rabbis taught to Rishahaya Rabbi Roifa. The master was a doctor. And apparently he was going to operate on his eye. 1 second. Visama, and he blinded him. Lachter l'shinai, to sort of clean out a tooth. Vehipila, and he knocked at the tooth by mistake. The halacha is sichek ba'adin, he laughs at the master of Yatzel Cheres. And he goes out, he's emancipated. Rav Shimon Gamliel says no. V'shichasa, it says that the word shachas here is destructive. Hashchasa. It has to be destructive action. It says if he knocks out his eye or tooth, v'shichasa, and it was destructive, lachav shishalchenu, he goes out free. Over here, it wasn't destructive. He planned on engaging in constructive activity. He planned on, fitting the guy a pair of glasses, or maybe cleaning his tooth, giving him a dental cleaning, and therefore it wasn't intentionally damaging, and therefore he does not go out free. What do the rabbis do with the condition that it's required to be damaging? Gemara says, so this is sort of some sort of what do they call this? I can't remember the actual word for it. It's not coming to me now. He was doing a fetal surgery, and the sima uber shebemeyal, and he blinded the fetus. Potter, he's exempt. My timer, the amar krobeshichasa at shichaven l'shachasa. 1 second. Okay. In other words, over there, in the case where he was trying to reposition the fetus, so he had no intention in engaging in the fetus's eye. I presume it's probably too small to intentionally engage in. So therefore, that's why, in other words, it was both constructive and it was entirely unintentional. He was never engaging in the eye at all. But Rav Shimon Gamliel's scenario, he did intend on cleaning the guy's tooth or sort of fixing the guy's eye, and therefore he is liable. The idach and Rabbi Lazar, nafka. The fact that the word v'shichasa is plural, so you can learn out two things. Number one is you have to have intention for the organ in question, and second of all, it has to be destructive intentions. The idach shachas shichas alaydarsh, they do not interpret this verse as two different inclusions, only as one inclusion. The rabbi's inclusion is you have to have intention to touch the eye. If you had no intention at all to touch the eye, then the slave would not be emancipated. Amar of Shesha says, the guy was blind, he couldn't see, but you went ahead and you removed his eye. So now he has a big hole in his head. The slave leaves his bondage. My time up, because he is missing a limb. And not only that, I have proof to this. The Tana Tuna, we have a Bryce that says, okay, the Tana Tuna, Tamas v'zachros b'behema, v'ein Tamas v'zachros b'ifus. There is a law that we have an animal, when you bring an animal, it has to be blemish free. But if you remember from Tisha B'Av, we learned about Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. What did Bar Kamsa do? He brought the animal that had the blemish on it. Right? It was a blemish under Jewish law, but not under secular law. Okay, so the law of no blemish applies to animals. And similarly, the law that you specifically have to bring a male animal, in the case where you have to bring a male animal, applies specifically to animals and not to birds. Okay, I didn't specifically mention in one of the psukim. You can see Taisus for more details. Yochel, I would think Yav Shagapa, if the wing dried out, but Niktar Ragla, if its foot was chopped off, Nechtata Eina, the eye was popped out, that would be kosher even for birds. In other words, even though a blemish does not invalidate a bird's, but if it's missing an organ, then it's not a bird. It's a bird that's missing something. And because the Torah says you take min ha'if from amongst the birds, that means that there are some birds that are not kosher for sacrifices. What type of birds? Birds that are missing a limb. And the point here is that we see that there's two categories. There's blemishes, and then there's missing a limb. And if you move from a blemish meaning blind, to missing a limb meaning not actually having an eye, that's another stage. And in that case, everyone would agree that the slave is emancipated. Amar of Chibarashi, Amar Rav. Interesting Gemara here. If Chibarashi says the name of Rav, so this is a rare scenario, but it happens, and it happens today too. Someone's born with an 11th finger, top of 25a, literally the first word. Yiserta v'chotcha. So the slave was born with 11 fingers. Presumably he, young or old, whatever it is, he never had the surgery, and now he wants to remove the finger. And he took off the 11th finger. The slave goes out free. When it says it has to be that the 11th finger was in the same as the Dr. Seuss, right? It had to be in line. It had to be in line to the other fingers. If it was randomly popping out somewhere, then it would not be included. Then the slave would not go out free. But if it was in line with the other things, then even though it's an abnormality, slave would still leave. Okay, trigger warning for the next Gemara.
Hey, what?
Trigger warning for the next Gemara.
All right.
Sabid in Nizunya, the elders of the town of Nizunya, so this is the warning. What happens if the elderly gentlemen don't come to the shir of Rav Chisda? So he says to Rav Hamnuna, Rav Chisda was very upset. Like the elders of the community don't come to his lecture. So he says to Rav Hamnuna, go tell them ziltz ne'inu, go stay in your houses. This is a very gentle way of telling them that they are excommunicated for not coming to his lecture. So Azal Amar Lahu, So Rav Hamnuna went around and he says, "My time He says to them, he says, "Why didn't you show up to the lecture?" So the elder says to him, "Am I Nesa? Why should we go?" We asked him a question and he's not able to answer. In other words, Rav Chiz is not such a big scholar. We asked him a question, he didn't have the answer. Amar Lahus, he says to them, he says, "Have you asked me a question? I'm his student. You've never asked me a question I couldn't answer. So ask me, let's see, maybe I can answer the question." Ask me the question. So he says, "Okay, they asked him the question. What's the question? A slave who was castrated at his testicles. Mahu. What? At his testicles. Testicular castration. Mahu. What's the story? Is that kemum shebegoli? Is that an exposed organ? Or is it considered hidden because it's sort of, it's sort of encased in a sack?" Okay, so guess what? Rav Hamnuna could not answer the question. This is the first question Rav Hamnuna couldn't ask them. So what did he do? They said to him, "Okay, what's your name?" Hamnuna. It's not Hamnuna. They said to him, "Lav Hamnuna. Your name is not Hamnuna. Ela Karanuna. Karanuna is he's a Yoshev Kronis. He's the guy who sits on the side and wastes his time, basically. Your time waster, a kibitzer. Okay, also Kamedah of Chizda, a slacker. So also Kamedah of Chizda. So okay, so he brings the question to Rav Chizda. Maybe Rav Chizda can answer. He says, "Masnisim b'ayminach." You're asking me a clear Mishnah. Shnan we learn. Esrim v'arba Rosh Ivarim Shabbat. There are 24 organs, 24 main organs, or Rosh Ivarim is like the tips of the body. Kulam einim etam mishum mechya. If you have a tsaras on any of these organs, there's no tsaras. Why is there no tsaras? So let's give an example. One of them, for example, is the ear. So let's say a person has tsaras around the top of his ear. There's one problem here. The kohen cannot look at the tsaras in one glance. He has to look this way and then look that way. Right? He has to bend the ear to move it over. If that's the case, there's no tsaras. Okay. The Elohim Rosh, it's Elohim. What's the 24? Take out your calculators. Rosh Etzbois, Yadayim V'Raglayim, the extremities of the hands and the feet. That would be 20, right? Hopefully, except unless the guy was born with the 11th finger. V'Rosh Eznayim, the tips of the ears. V'Rosh Hachait, that's 22. V'Rosh Hachaitim, the tip of the nose, that's 23. V'Rosh Hagvia, and the tip of the male member, male reproductive organ, that is 24. And in the scenario where the person in question was a woman, the nipples. Rabbi Yehudah says Af Shabbaish, also of a man. The Tani Allah, and we learned the Kulam Eved Yitzim Lecheras. In any of these organs, a slave goes out free. Okay, Rabbi says Af Hasirus. Also, if the person or animal was castrated, if the person was castrated. Okay. Rabbi, what type of castration are we talking about? We'll get to that in a moment. Benazi says afaloshin, also the tongue. Amar Mar. So let's go through the Bryce. So this is Rav Chizda talking. Rav Chizda is in the middle of answering the question. Is Sirus Bebeitzim, testicular castration, does that qualify a slave for his emancipation? So Rabbi Aimer Afa Sirus Tamai. How exactly was he castrated? Ilema Sirus to Gid. They removed his member. Hainu Gvia. That is the same as Rosh Gvia. It's the same as
Rabbi, was it a members only club?
That is already listed as the male member, as one of the 24. Elalav, it must be Sirus to Beitzim. It must be that he's castrated.
But I guess after the fact,
there's testicular castration. Rabbi Aimer, I'm not stopping. Rabbi Aimer Afa Sirus. Also, Rabbi Aimer, okay. So very clearly we see here, Elalav Sirus to Beitzim, and that answers your question. It's a machlokes between Rabbi and the Chachamim. Your question is, does this qualify as Sirus? And the answer is that for these elderly gentlemen of the town of Nizunya, that they were incorrect. They should have asked Rav Chizda the question. Rav Chizda did have an answer ready to go. Okay, now that we're finishing discussing this brisa, let's continue discussing the brisa. Okay, so Rabbi Yemer Afa Sirus. Rabbi says that castration, and we're interpretation of that as testicular, is also qualifies as one of the organs where the slave is emancipated. And Benazi says also the tongue. The Rebbe Loshen Loi, Rebbe says the tongue is not sufficient to emancipate you. V'raminu, we have a scenario. Okay, so basically, without getting into very specific details here, let's say you have somebody who's tamei. You have to do hazah. You have to sprinkle the ashes of the red heifer on him with water, whatever it is. And the key here is that this sprinkling must reach parts of his body that are exposed. If it's covered parts of his body, doesn't count. So let's explain. The sprinkling fell on his lips. On his mouth. Which part of the mouth? Well, that will be the question. Rebbe says it's valid. So in other words, Rebbe holds that this is an exposed organ. The Chachamim, the rabbis say it is not valid. It's not an exposed organ. My lab, what does the mouth mean? Alashoyne, on his tongue. And we see clearly here that Rebbe says the tongue is considered an exposed organ. So Gemara says no, al sfosav, on his lips. So Gemara says al sfosav pshito, his lips are exposed. Obviously, his lips are exposed. I would think zimin decholam sfasa. If a guy closes his lips tightly, right, then it sort of covers part of the lips. You can't see it. So maybe that's called actually part of the body that's concealed. So therefore, Rebbe says no, Kamash Malon, that's not considered part of the body that's concealed. Okay, Vatanya, the Bryce says Alashainai. The problem is there's another Bryce that says specifically the Hazah actually landed on his tongue. Va'itanya, and another Bryce that says V'shenitla roiv haloshin, that if you have a blemish in an animal, if most of the tongue, what's most of the tongue? So the tongue is connected at some point. I can't remember what that word is. Where exactly the tongue is connected. If most of the tongue is cut off, then the slave goes out free, or the animal is considered to have had a blemish. Rebbe says, most of the talker of the tongue. What's the talker? The talker as in the part that talks. It's the part of the tongue, majority of the tongue measured from the portion where the tongue is connected until the tip of the tongue outwards or distally. Okay. So Gemara says, here's the final conclusion, which we'll stop here. Rebbe says, Sirus V'lemi B'Yaloshin. Rebbe says testicular castration, and certainly a tongue. Benazi Aimer Loshin Avol Sirus Loi. Benazi says a tongue, but testicular castration would not be sufficient for him to be emancipated. Okay. Umay af akamaisa. So what does Rebbe say? Also castration. It means also not only the 24, but also this. That's the case, that Rebbe is more expansive than Ben Azai. So let's put Ben Azai first. So the Gemara says, you're right. In other words, the Bryce was sort of adding things. It added first Rebbe because it heard the opinion of Rebbe, then it heard the opinion of Ben Azai, so it added Ben Azai, but didn't want to change the order of the Mishnah. But technically speaking, the truth is that Ben Azai probably should be before Rebbe because Rebbe is more expansive than Ben Azai.